Well, welcome back, folks, to another episode of American Genesis, the creation of American Scripture. Sorry, we're running a little bit late today. I don't know what happened, but we're here for sure. So let's get started. A little music, as always. Well, got ahead of myself here.
If tomorrow all the things were lost I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I'd thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died and gave that right to me. And I'd gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Okay, I've already run this. There have been two people. Trivia question: there have been two people today whose run they. Oh, I'm going well today. There's only been two people who've won both a Nobel Prize and had a number one hit on the Billboard chart. One was Bob Dylan, and the other one was the Vice President of the United States. Good question. See if anybody knows who it was, the Vice President. Well, obviously, you know the name of the song. It's all in the game. The best by a man by the name of Tommy Edwards. The vice president was Charles Dawes, who was Calvin Coolidge's vice president. Almost nobody remembers him, but those that do remember him as being the person that won the Nobel Peace Prize for. He actually did quite a bit of work on reparations after World War One. But he was also a talented musician, and he liked to compose songs just for the fun of it. Probably the best known song he composed was something called Dawes Melody, and it was real popular in the 40s. Tommy Dorsey's orchestra played it quite a bit and all. Well, in the summer of 1951, there was a songwriter by the name of Carl Sigman who was looking for a tune for an idea about a sentimental song. And he happened upon Dawes Melody, and he thought, hey, this would be a great tune. So he wrote his song to that song. It was recorded by a man by the name of Tommy Edwards. It was fairly good, very popular, but then he recorded it again in 1958, and it really took off. He ended up being the first African American musician to have a number one hit on the Billboard Hot 100. After that, it became a big hit. It was recorded by several different people. You can see there the Four Tops, Nat King Cole, Elton John, Merle Haggard, quite a combination of people there. So let's listen to It's All in the Game. And I bet you'll remember the song written by the Vice President of the United States, Charles Dawes.
Many a tear has to fall, but it's all in the game. All in the wonderful game that we know as love. You have words with him, and your future's looking thin. But these things your hearts can rise above. Once in a while he won't call, but it's all in the game. Soon he'll be there at your side with a sweet bouquet. And he'll kiss your lips and caress your waiting fingertips, and your hearts will fly away. Soon he'll be there at your side with a sweet bouquet. Then he'll kiss your lips and caress your waiting fingertips, and your hearts will fly away.
Okay, quite a trivia question there. Okay, let's head on. So we're going to start talking today about the presidency. Article 2 outlines the presidency of the United States, and it vests all the power, the executive power, in the president, obviously. Remember, there was a little bit of debate in the Constitutional Convention about exactly how much power the president should have. So they just basically said all the executive power. Problem is, they really didn't define what the executive power was. So it's kind of grown with the office of the presidency. In the beginning, the president was kind of an equal. And for the first 200 years or so of our nation, basically it was kind of considered equal to congressmen and the Supreme Court. And no one really considered this person to be just anything really extra special. That began to change somewhat, as we'll see. The framers of the Constitution, remember, debated the nature of the presidency, and some wanted a really strong presidency, some wanted a parliamentarian presidency, some wanted just kind of like a caretaker. But for the most part, he just did end up having specific powers of the executive branch. There's some reasons why the powers of the president has changed so much. In our day and age of the media, it's so much easier to concentrate on one person. So there's a unity of the office that allows him to command the attention of the public. You know, when the president speaks, he is the only person speaking for the executive branch. You've got 435 congressmen. You've got 100 senators. You've got 9 Supreme Court justices who really try to stay kind of in the background for the most part. So really, the president has this power, this unity of the office. He's also kind of a social and an economic leader, more so than the other branches of the government. And of course, obviously, he's going to lead during times of crisis. When something bad happens, 911, a war, an economic downturn, something happens, recession and inflation, whatever, you look for the president to lead. And whether or not the president leads successfully often determines whether or not that president is going to be reelected if he's up for reelection. Thus, he's going to receive the credit if something good happens or the blame if something bad happens. Sometimes they don't deserve it. And again, I could think of many, many different instances where presidents have deserved blame and didn't get it, or should have been blamed and weren't blamed. I think the classic example, if you recall back when George Herbert Walker Bush was the president of the United States, got elected in 1988 after Ronald Reagan, he was an extremely popular president. In that case, his popularity numbers were just atmospheric. He was one of those presidents that just seemed like he had all the credentials in the world. He had led a successful war in the beginning of his presidency. The economy was really booming. And I mean, his numbers were atmospheric. And then all of a sudden, the downturn came and we went into a semi recession and people turned on him like nothing else. As it turned out, just as the recession was ending and things were getting better, the presidential election took place in 1992. And whether he deserved it or not, he got the blame for the recession. And he ended up being defeated. And you would have never guessed that, in the first couple of years of his presidency, because everything was going just tremendously well. Did he deserve blame for the recession? That's a political decision that people made, and they decided he did. And as a result, he was not reelected. Another reason that the office of the presidency is so up there in front is the fact that it's a human institution. And we oftentimes begin to look on the presidency as a reflection of the person that's holding that office. So you can look back at past presidents and think about different presidents like Ronald Reagan, or just to mention George Herbert Walker Bush, or Bill Clinton, or George Bush the Jr., or Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. Every one of these presidencies has taken on a reflection of the person that occupies that office. And so it's so much easier to look at the presidency in terms of just one person. Now, that doesn't mean that just because the president is the most powerful person in the world, and he is, folks. I mean, there is no debate about that. When the president of the United States decides to make a decision, he's making a decision that's going to have ramifications for the whole world. That doesn't mean he's all powerful. He does have constraints placed upon him, both by the Constitution as well as those that have just evolved over time. For instance, we have already talked about the checks and balance system. We know that there are certain checks and balances built into the Constitution, which keeps him from being too powerful. At the same time, there is this separation of powers that we've talked about, where he can't do certain things. He can veto legislation or pass legislation, but he can't make laws. Only the Congress can make laws, and he can't determine whether or not a law is legal or not. Only the Supreme Court can do that. On top of that, folks, he is an elected official, and he has to have public support for his agenda. If he does not have public support, he is not going to win. That's just all there is to it. He may be a good president, he may be a good person, but if for whatever reason the public is not behind him, his agenda is not going to happen. And he's under constant pressure to campaign. Folks, the president never stops campaigning. Even after they've won a second term, as they do, they're still under pressure to campaign for his party. Now, he doesn't, he's not quite as involved because he's not campaigning for himself necessarily. He's campaigning for his legacy, which is very important. On top of that, the media idea of watching the president, the watchdog media, has really changed in the last 40, 50 years. For most of the history of this country, a president's personal flaws that were not criminal were considered kind of off limits to the press. They overlooked a lot of things that they would not overlook for most people. We've had presidents that were alcoholics. We've had presidents that were predators. We've had presidents that were just absolutely dunderheads. We've had presidents that had absolutely no business being president because of their personal flaws. But the press traditionally overlooked these as long as it didn't get into the public office. That began to change in the 1980s, about 30, 40 years ago. And we'll talk about this as we get toward the end of the presidency, how it's changed though. Um, just think about this, folks. We now know that President Kennedy, you may love the guy. You may think he's one of the greatest presidents that ever lived. I won't debate that one way or the other. That's totally up to you. What we do know for sure is the guy was, uh, I mean, you can only say he was a sexual predator. That's all there was to it. He absolutely had affairs all over the place, almost daily. And the result was that it actually got to the point where it was kind of dangerous for the country. Uh, if you know anything about President Kennedy, you probably know all about the stories about him and some of the different people he had liaisons with and their connections to less than favorable subjects. The point of it is that the media knew all of this. They knew exactly what was going on, and they just left it alone. And after it was all over with, they kind of began to think, maybe we didn't do our job very well. As a result, things begin to change. And now the president is under clear view of the watchdog media. I mean, all you have to do is look at our recent presidents, and you know that for the most part, the media doesn't give them a break, of either party for the most part. There's it's been maybe one or two that's gotten a lot more of a break than they maybe deserve, but they definitely are under the watchdog media. Now, there's two ways of looking at the presidential power. There's the traditional power, and this was expressed primarily by William Howard Taft, very, very much so. The traditional view was that the president only had powers specifically granted by the Constitution. And he wrote about this. He said the correct view of the president is that he can exercise no power which cannot be fairly and reasonably traced to some specific grant of power or justly implied from the Constitution. There is no undefined residuum of power, he said, where he can exercise because it seems to him to be in the public interest. So, for the most part, most presidents up to about the time of FDR felt like if the president didn't say, if the Constitution didn't say the president could do it, they couldn't do it. Now, there were exceptions. Washington, the very first president, actually created a cabinet when the Constitution didn't say anything about a cabinet. Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution the president has power to buy land, but he did it. Andrew Jackson expanded the veto power. The point was up to Andrew Jackson that a president could veto a bill if he thought it was unconstitutional. Andrew Jackson said, I can veto a bill because I don't like it. And he did. And that changed the whole concept of the veto. Polk and Lincoln expanded the growth of military power because they were both involved in very large wars. Polk with the Mexican-American War, Lincoln with the Civil War. But these were the exceptions, folks. For the most part, presidents kind of said, hey, unless the Constitution says I can do it, I can't do it. That began to change in the 20th century. And it was probably most well said by this man here, Teddy Roosevelt, who actually came before William Howard Taft. So I don't want to confuse you, but he actually had this whole concept of the stewardship theory. He said the traditional presidency has to change. He said, I decline to adopt the view that what was necessary for the nation could not be done by the president unless he could find some specific authorization to do it. My belief was that it was not only the president's right, but his duty to do anything that the needs of the nation demanded unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution. So the traditional theory says, unless the Constitution says you can do it, you can't do it. The stewardship theory says, unless the Constitution says you can't do it, you can do it. Totally different viewpoints about what the presidency could do. Today, the stewardship theory is definitely the theory that most presidents work under now. It changed dramatically under FDR. Up to FDR, most of them kind of held the traditional theory, except for Teddy Roosevelt. After FDR, it totally went to stewardship theory 100%. Now, let's look at how the president's elected. And we all know that the president is elected in a weird way. Article 2, Section 1 created an elaborate and complex system to elect the president and vice president we know as the Electoral College. Now, you probably are aware that each state is assigned a specific number of electors equal to their senators and their representatives. So that's 538 total because they give the District of Columbia 3. These assignments are made every 10 years after the census taken, and then the legislature reapportions the state legislatures reapportion their districts and draw the boundary lines to the districts. Each political party then, when the election comes about for the president, is actually choosing a slate of electors. You're not voting for the president of the United States. You're voting for people to vote for the president of the United States. Now, you might not, this may seem silly to you, and it seems silly to a lot of people, folks, because electors are generally not bound by the Constitution or the law to vote for the candidate for which they were chosen. Most of them do. You can look at the Electoral College map there. For instance, you can see down here in Missouri, they have 10. There's 8 congressional districts and 2 senators. Michigan has 16. They have 14 congressional districts and 2 senators. California has 55, by far and away the largest state. That's because they have 53 congressional districts. They have by far and away the largest population and 2 senators. So the Electoral College then is made up of these electors, and they're not bound in every state. 24 states do bind them. But even then, there can be what's called faithless electors, people that are elected to vote for a certain candidate, and they say, I'm not going to vote for that person, I'm going to vote for someone else. That doesn't happen very often. And when it has happened, it has absolutely no outcome, difference in the outcome. There's never been an election where a faithless elector has made a difference in the outcome of the election. And there's only been a few elections where they've actually been these faithless electors. After general election in November, the electors generally meet in their respective states, and on the third Monday of December, they cast their ballots for the president. So this is a date that's basically determined. The third Monday of December, they cast their ballots for the president. And then on the 6th of January, these ballots are counted in the Congress, and the joint session of Congress meets and counts the vote. Now, I think we all remember 2020, where there was this big deal on January 6th, where certain people that were loyal to Donald Trump stormed the White House, and you may have, the Congress, you may have all sorts of views about that, good or bad, but they definitely did. They were trying to alter the outcome of the election at that point. It didn't work, and obviously, it wasn't ever going to work. But it was a big deal, folks, because they were trying to basically put pressure upon the Congress and other officials to make sure that they did not elect Joe Biden as president. It didn't work. He won the election, and they ended up certifying him as the president. The candidate wins the popular vote, and he receives all the electoral votes for that state. This is another oddity of the Electoral College. It's a winner take all. So you can win a state by one vote and still win every one of the electoral votes. There are 2 exceptions. Nebraska proportions out their electoral votes, as does the state of Maine. But other than that, all 48 of the states has a winner-take-all situation. So let's look at the recent presidential election. You can see here, Every one of these states in red was won by Donald Trump. The ones in blue were won by Vice President Harris. And you can see that, for the most part, the East Coast and down to Virginia, for the most part, went to Vice President Harris. She also won Illinois and Minnesota. She won Colorado and New Mexico. And then she won the West Coast. President Trump won all the other states. Now, the problem was that, most of these other states out here, like Wyoming and Idaho and North and South Dakota and Nebraska and all these, Utah, they don't have a lot of electoral votes. California has 55. New York has a whole bunch, as does, some of these other states. As it turned out, President Trump won 312 electoral votes. Vice President Harris won 226. So he was accorded the victory. He also won the popular vote, 73 million votes, as opposed to about 68 million. So it was a pretty sizable win, both popular and as far as electoral vote. If you ever begin to wonder if this country is really divided, take a look at this next map. And this map is the one that always gets me. This is the map of the United States by county. And you can see, which counties voted for which president. And you can see that the country looks red. That's all there is to it, folks. But it's red where there's not that much population a lot of times. For instance, you can see the West Coast here, all up and down the West Coast, was won by Vice President Harris. She won big sections of Arizona and northern New Mexico. She won, big sections of Colorado. She also won the New England states for the most part. And she won the cities. Take, for instance, you look at Missouri. She won Kansas City. She won Columbia. She won St. Louis. Other than that, she didn't win any other counties in Missouri. You look up here to Michigan, by far and away, most of the counties voted for President Trump, but the ones that didn't vote were the ones where the big cities were. And you can just look for the most part all up and down the country. It's a very telling map. It makes you understand just how really polarized this country is, because even though it looks like President Trump has the vast majority of the country, he doesn't have the vast majority of the population. He did have a majority this time, but not a vast majority. Now, a lot of people want to do away with the Electoral College. They say, hey, this thing is an antique. We don't need it anymore. We can count the votes, and we ought to just count the votes based on whoever wins the most votes. So there's been all sorts of suggestions how to change this. The district plan, they say, hey, why don't we just do it by district? So the electoral votes are determined by congressional districts. So if you win a congressional district in Missouri, you win that electoral vote. And if you win a congressional, if your opponent wins 4 or 5 others, then they win those. That makes somewhat sense. Proportional allocation, proportions electoral vote according to the popular vote. I don't know what that would accomplish, but that's one of those ideas out there. The popular plurality, whoever gets the most popular votes wins. The popular majority plan requires a majority to win, and if no one wins a majority, then a runoff election is held. This is the way they do it in a lot of countries. If you have a third-party candidate and he makes it where none of the candidates actually win a majority, then you have a runoff election. Trouble is, nobody wants to have 2 of these things, right? Here's the problem, folks. The framers of the Constitution wanted a pluralistic government. Remember, a pluralistic government is a government where there are many centers of influence. The reason they wanted this was because they did not want the majority to, absolutely overrule the minority. They wanted to make sure that the minority had a fair vote. So they said, if we don't watch out, we'll have a few states that have large populations that will overrule the vast majority of the country. If you don't believe that, think back to that map I just showed you about the counties. If you had it on popular vote, it could be a real mess, folks. I thought this cartoon was pretty cute. How do you feel about ditching the Electoral College? The dad says. And it says 16-year-olds given the vote. And he said, dude, college, I haven't even taken my SATs yet. There are people that actually want 16-year-olds to vote for college. Folks, I worked with 16-year-olds for 38 years in the high school situation. You do not want 16-year-old kids voting for president of the United States. They are not ready to make those decisions. Trust me. I taught 16-year-olds government, and they are, for the most part, definitely not ready to do that. Okay, now, the result has been that at least on 5 occasions in this country's history, that there have been presidential elections where the person that won the popular vote has lost the presidency. For instance, John Quincy Adams in 1824 was elected president by Congress after a tie vote. He tied Andrew Jackson, and John Quincy Adams was elected by the Congress. That's how it says it to be done. 1876, Rutherford Hayes won over Samuel Tilden, even though he lost the popular vote by 500,000. This had to do with Reconstruction, and there's a lot of people felt like the election was kind of not a real good election. Benjamin Harrison won the electoral vote over Grover Cleveland, who won the popular vote. Grover Cleveland, of course, came back and won his second term after Benjamin Harrison was president. Up to that point, Grover Cleveland was the only president who had ever done that. Now, of course, we have the same thing happen again, where Donald Trump has come back and won his second term after Joe Biden was president between his 2 terms. George W. Bush, I think we're all remember this one very well, the hanging chads and all this in 2000. He won the electoral vote over Al Gore, even though he lost the popular vote by 500,000 votes. And of course, we all know that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes in 2016, even though she lost the election, the electoral vote. The reason this happened in this particular election was that she had overwhelming vote totals in some big states like California and New York. I mean, they voted overwhelmingly for her and drove up her popular vote totals. But she lost a lot of other areas narrowly. The result was she won the popular vote by 3 million votes and lost the election. So that happens. So we're running a little bit late today, so I don't want to keep you late. We got started late, and I apologize for that. I don't know what happened, but we will pick up next week and start talking about the qualifications for president and what the president gets for being president, and we'll start talking about the roles of the president. So I hope you enjoyed this. I apologize for the problem, whatever it was. But we will definitely get it straightened out and make sure next week it doesn't happen again. So, Kent Ridge, I appreciate you staying with me. Donna Hart, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
And
No, you can say it again.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, it was very